Hello. I don't hear anybody. Hello. I can only see myself. Oh, oh yes. Hello. I cannot hear you. Can you hear me? Nope, I cannot hear anything. Wait a minute. Nope, I can see that you're trying a mic. I still can't hear you. But I test my headphone before it should be working.
All right, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
There it is.
Yes. Yes.
Hello. So thank you to Lily Fletcher, Emma Bayada, Tinwan Lei for these 3 beautiful films. Maybe just one extra little round of applause, you mind? And let me know if I'm pronouncing folks' names wrong. I will correct it. This last piece, Lei, is, I mean, an unbelievably beautiful, patient, very delicate work that I think we all just experienced. And I have this really unformed idea in my mind that I'm going to say out loud, and it's probably wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway. And I'm thinking of this, like, of a couple of phrases in my mind. I'm thinking of an idea of like the emancipatory potential of confinement in a way. And also I'm thinking about like the wisdom of limited subjectivity. Like this, there's a Jakob von Uxküll has this idea of Umwelt, right? Like that each living being has its own world that it inhabits. And I think all of these works made me think of this idea, and that world is limited in some way, that it is confined in some way, and yet within it there's an infinite potential always. And that's how, at least that's how I felt watching your piece, Lei. And I don't know if it's something that you were thinking of, but I mean, obviously we are confined to this one building, this one space, and these children make of it something that seems maybe things that would be mundane to us or seem boring, that they manage to find some joy or some pleasure in. And even thinking about Lily's piece, like the limited subjectivity of a toy, right? And how much might be imbued in that. So those are the thoughts that I have right now. It's been a long day. I'm quite tired. I don't really have a clear question to ask you about those ideas. But yeah, I wonder if you could respond to just this idea, Lei, of being in this confined space and what potential that might bring, especially in the context of childhood.
Yes, definitely. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And what's your name?
My name is Eric. Sorry.
Eric. Yes, Eric, I think you made a very, very smart comment about the film. I think it goes without saying that this is kind of the environment that I grew up. So I grew up in the 90s in Shenzhen, in the exact city. And the market is where my dad used to go a lot to shop for electronic goods to build his own startup. So that's why I was very familiar with the environment before we started filming. And it was a total coincidence when we met the kids, and because we wanted to make something that is way more traditional, less poetic, less patient, just interviewing a lot of people. And the kids were one of the last people that we met, and the mom. And I was very touched by the environment that they sort of like they're growing up in, and the kind of imagination they have. You mentioned the word Umwelt. I was having a kind of similar but different word in my mind when I was filming. It's called Weltschmerz, also German, which is like literally as world pain, but it's kind of like you're feeling a lot of sort of oopsie.
Lei,
I
we
think I
lost
just
you for a moment there.
disconnected.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm
we might
back.
have some connection issues.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but it's not clear.
Okay. How about now?
Oh,
Yeah,
I
I'm
think you might be
back.
back.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think so too. Yeah, so I was having quite a lot of Weltschmerz, which is world pain. And because looking at the kids, one of the feelings that I had was remembering how confined the space was when I was growing up. I was surrounded by like factory things, and we were living under tin roof, and there's no water, and electricity was stolen from the factory. I mean, of course, the kids were not growing up in as bad a situation, but still they're very confined. And looking at them, I felt very touched by sort of their imagination, which has a lot of power. I hope the film shows that. But at the same time, I was also quite sad and moved by the fact that I know when they grow up, or just by being a few years older, they're going to see the world in a very different way. They're going to feel a lot of the confinement and less of the imagination. And especially as women growing up in that space, they're still just girls. They will have a lot more confinements, expectations, social pressure that unfortunately have grown even harsher in the past few years in China compared to the years when I was growing up. So I'm actually feeling quite a lot of sympathy and sadness for the girls, and while also having my own Weltschmerz about the way the world is going and the direction China is going into, and a lot of the struggles that I see in my female students. So I think there's a lot of mixed feelings, which I hope that I convey through the film.
Yeah, I think you really do, and mixed feelings, not in the sense of ambivalence, but of a real care, uh, but that mixed feeling of care, which is not quite the same, right? And it brings with it this melancholy, and the melancholy doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't necessarily get me down, honestly. Like it feels, like I said, it feels quite emancipatory in a way, at least the way that it's filmed. And I think melancholy plays a role in your piece as well, Lily. I don't know if you want to speak to that and the context that you're making your work in, and your own cultural context, and where it's, I mean, because the end credit sequence, I think, really reveals a lot of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, sure. Is this on? Um, yeah, I feel like my generation, we were so overexposed to capitalism and all these toys being pushed on us constantly. And we each had that one special toy that no matter what was advertised, it meant so much to us. But a lot of people forget about that toy. So I hope by watching that movie, you thought about your childhood toy and where it's hiding, whether it's in your parents' basement or hopefully not at the thrift store. um, so yeah, but I think that emptiness kind of or the melancholy that you were touching on of just revisiting our childhood and understanding what that material thing meant to us and kind of what it means to you now, even if it's not physically there with you, but maybe just a representation of your childhood and how you kind of carry that with you. So
Yeah, the Oliver's concern now for Lego Oliver having been kept in this box, right, for potentially a dozen years or so, right?
Yeah.
I think is always like really touching, but it also suggests that there is some kind of subjectivity to these objects that's not the same, but somehow overlaps with ours, or is coextensive with our own subjectivity in some way. Um, I am conscious of the time of evening, so I think we can go to the audience if there's a floating, Toma's got a floating mic. Yeah. So, audience, if you have questions for either of these fantastic artists, please raise your hand. I know they're out there. Yes. Louisa. Also beautifully programmed. The way that these pieces flow together is really something.
Thank you. So, hi, Lei. Hi, Lily.
Hello.
Very happy to see you here and have this moment together with the audience. So, my question is related to growth because these films are about sort of growth or going from one stage to another or looking back to a stage of life. And I'm wondering what this film, what the making of this film represent to you. Um, if there was a sort of a growth making it for you. Um, yeah, that's my question. Or if you can talk a little bit more about the process and what that meant to you.
Go ahead, Lei.
Thank you for the question. I grew up in Shenzhen until I was 19, and then I moved to the States. I studied and spent almost like now 1/3 of my life in the States. And when I was back in Shenzhen for this film, which is around 2018, 19, that was the time when I wanted to go back to my hometown to sort of um, see my roots or explore my roots. I think that's a very typical trajectory for any artist out there. Once you're outside for a long time, you want to go back to see how you grew up and to pick up some memories and to see how the kids are, if they grew up in the same way that I did. So I think I jumped into the project with quite a lot of naivete, and then I met Julian, who is watching this, my producer, and we're basically a two-people team. We're very small, and I don't know why he decided to jump onto the project. I just pitched him the idea that I wanted to make something. I was in Berlin at the time, and we met in Berlin, and I said I wanted to make something about startups in Berlin and Shenzhen. And that's literally sort of the pitch and the beginning of this film, which is way, very, very far away from what you have seen tonight. And magically decided to jump onto my ship, and then we went to China. And as I said, we wanted to make something quite sort of traditional TV documentary with sort of the industry in mind, and we interviewed quite a lot of people. And that was our first trip. I think that was summer 2018 or 2019. And then when we came back with the footage appeared to be quite boring, as one can expect, and quite sort of standard, a lot of like headshots, people talking heads. And at one point, I started writing a lot. We had a lot of conversations about what this film should be. And we sort of took another jump in deciding that we wanted to make something that is more poetic, more artistic, and more to do with my own sort of childhood. So the writing that took place during the two shooting trips really helped me a lot in understanding sort of what the story is and what this film means to me. And when we go back again for another trip, we have decided that we're only going to film the girls. We spend a lot of time with them. And by the time we filmed them, the second time, I've already spent a whole year with them and their mom, and knowing them, chatting with them, and knowing all the problems they have when they grow up. And I think it's quite similar to a lot of problems that I had and everybody has when they were growing up. So in short, the film sort of ended up becoming something that is quite therapeutic to me, in the sense that I felt like I've gone through sort of like a long therapy session. Sort of coming to terms with the confinement and the sadness I had when I was growing up, I remember writing something about how I realized for a lot of immigrant children, and I was one because I moved to Shenzhen when I was 5. I had some really turbulent years, the first sort of 2 to 3 years living under a tin roof, feeling very unsafe, irregular schools. And I felt like I had probably some grudges against my parents who took this choice without asking me. But then, of course, I was 5. You know, your parents are never going to ask you if you want to migrate to a city or to a country with them when you're 5. They just take you with them, and thinking that they're doing the best for you. But I think I probably did hold some grudges around against them. And doing with the film, I think I was able to sort of allow my protagonist, or to see my protagonist having more power and agency in the world of control. And I think that view and that perspective and the process of filming that, interacting with them, have allowed me to sort of see a little bit more agency in myself as well, and come to terms with that. My parents took me to this new city, and sort of that's how I grew up. And yeah, that's sort of what the film kind of means to me, I guess. And I'm cutting off.
We lost you just a bit at the end, but I think we got most of that. Like, Lily, this idea of like the growth in the project being reflected somehow in the growth of the maker. Is there something to that?
Definitely. And yeah, I think obviously the theme of the film is growth, like from your childhood to your adulthood. But for me as a student filmmaker, there was a lot of growth in this project, and, you know, just learning how to do all the steps, all the editing, all the filming, stop motion, which is a pretty big thing to take on when you have other classes and jobs and things to do. So I think as a developing filmmaker and trying to decide where I want to situate myself in a documentary crew in the future, there was a lot of growth for me, and understanding what goes into a full-length project, what I can tackle and what I hope to tackle. Sometimes setting my hopes too big, and then, you know, realizing I need to be reasonable and bringing these inanimate objects to life. And by the end of it, although it was a project that I'd worked so hard on and I still see all the flaws in it, I'm really proud of what I did, and stepping out of my comfort zone and applying to this, my first festival. And yeah, I'm proud of it, and it definitely healed a bit of my inner child, and I hope that people feel that too when they watch it. So
Nice. More questions? Yes, in the front here.
So it was really funny. I'm here with my sister as well, and watching the children play, I recognized that one of our themes from a lot of our dolls and things was always a tornado having to come to the scene, always a storm. So seeing these kids having kind of the same themes going on, I thought was pretty hilarious. But for both of you, I'm curious, you know, having these projects where you're reflecting on other people's childhoods, were there some interesting themes that came up of, oh my gosh, I used to always play like that, or I feel the same way about my favorite toy growing up? Because I think there are some, I mean, I was sort of baffled by it. Like, I guess all of us sort of have these, you know, wild and scary fantasies sometimes, but I'm curious if anything specific came up for both of you.
Go ahead, Lily.
yeah, I think the common theme of kind of like turning it, your like stuffed toy or whatever it is, into your mini me. And my sister Emma was in the film. Henry was her teddy bear. And our teddy bears were best friends, and we're best friends. So yeah, I think kind of projecting yourself onto your toy. I think everyone kind of does that, in hopes that, you know, it has a bigger imagination than you, and you can project its imagination onto it. And then also with Oliver and Rhea, just seeing the difference in gender too. And, you know, Legos weren't as popular for me as a kid, but we still played the same way with them. And yeah, when I asked my subjects their questions, the questions that you ended up hearing the answers to through the toy's voice, I just noticed that a lot of the toys or the people spoke about kind of what hit them the hardest throughout their childhood and early adulthood, and how we kind of project those darknesses onto our toys in hopes that they can help us, even though who knows how much they actually can. So
Yeah, bringing up a theme from earlier today, how a toy might become witness to your trauma in some way, and that witness, that act of witnessing, is really important, and how it really stays with the object, even with its limited subjectivity. Lay.
Yes, definitely. Because I filmed Two Sisters, and I kind of grew up with my cousin, even though he's not my brother, but I kind of see him as one. And when I was filming with the Two Sisters, I can definitely see the friendship and the competition. And we captured quite a lot of footage. And Yulia and I, when we're in the editing stage, we keep discussing, to what extent we show the friendship, to what extent we want to show the camaraderie, and to what extent we want to show competition, the competitiveness. It's quite obvious to us as we're observing them that they're both kind of competing for their parents' love. At the same time, they really need each other to survive in that space. So it's quite a very sort of complex relationship. It really reminds me of how I was when I was with my cousin. We were always sort of fighting for the same toy, and he got it, I didn't get it, and it made a big scene about it, and my parents got really angry about it because I was not generous towards my younger cousin. So there was a lot of that in the girls too, and I felt like that was sort of part of the fun of it too. To seeing them sort of grow, and the kind of interaction, because I'm really interested in how people sort of build relationship, especially the earlier ones. So that's definitely quite a lot of fun to see. Another thing that sort of is very, very small but really touches me is towards the end of the film, I don't know if you remember, the two girls were having this hey ha moment, hey ha, towards the end of the film in front of the big window in the waiting room. And Yulia and I, because we saw the footage so many times, so we kind of give names to all the moments. And this to us is the hey ha game. And it sort of reminds us, the reason why we decided to keep that scene is that it really reminds us of sort of how children play. We come up with all these really funny games that has absolutely no meanings, no rules, and quite silly. And they came up with that thing just right on the spot. And they start to play this hey, and you say ha, I say hey, you say ha. And we just felt that that's sort of very representative of childhood and very beautiful. So we kept that. Yeah.
Nice. Questions, comments?
Thank you, and thank you both for your films. I have a question for Lay, but I think this is something that anybody can potentially weigh on. Lay, you don't make any direct reference to it, but this really feels like a quarantine film. And when you're kind of talking about Eric, when you're talking about the emancipatory possibility of confinement, I was like, I don't know how emancipatory was quarantine. I think sometimes you're sort of confronted with the limitation of your imagination in those spaces. But I kind of wonder if the patience that you found, if not in the documentation of this Lay, but then in the editing and the rhythms that you found, and in kind of translating that experience for us as viewers, was informed by your experience during quarantine, or if the film took on new significance for you as you were having that experience and perhaps editing it during that time. And Lily, perhaps for you, if also the kind of patience of stop motion is something that might have developed for you or become an interest coming out of that experience.
Go ahead, Lay.
Should I? Yes, definitely. The film, especially the editing part, was all done during quarantine, and it was quite ridiculous. We were all based in Berlin, and But because we're in sort of some kind of lockdown situation, so we all sort of work from home, looking at the footage, sometimes gathering together like me and Julian. But the world seemed to have stopped when we were working on the film. And that's definitely part of the process. But in terms of this sort of patience, I guess that's more of Julia and I's style. We're sort of very, very slow people. And we kind of really look for a rhythm for the film. I think that's one of the earliest conversations we had. My earlier film was very, very quick. And of course, I was less experienced as a filmmaker. So I didn't know how to pace things and didn't know how long the scene should take. And that was one of the earliest conversations I had with Julian. So when we're filming, when we're editing, I think we're constantly discussing how long a scene should be. And because towards the end of the editing and the sort of the whole production, post-production process, we have realized the film isn't really about a story. There's no beginning, middle, or end. I mean, it has chapters, but the film is more about giving a feeling of what childhood, in Shenzhen, China is like, what kind of environment the girls are growing up in. So it's quite sort of like an atmospheric and moody film. And when we have seen this is what the footage has and what we want to do with the film, we decided that we should go slow and let each moment and scene to sort of allow the audience to be able to dwell in it, to have enough time to observe without the film or the image or the sound giving you any extra information, that you can just see there, sit and observe. This is why the film is quite slow, and we're very often to be very patient in the editing process. So it's kind of more of partially, I think we're quite influenced by our environment, but partially also quite sort of like an artistic decision that we've made more towards the end of the editing process. Yeah.
Lily?
Yeah, so being a senior in high school when COVID started, and then a freshman when it was in full force at CU Boulder, and then it's still really affecting my college until really last year and the fall semester when I made this. I think the most it affected me was just understanding that you can make a project with anything. And I think your project shows this as well. There's a story in everyone. And when COVID hit, we had to really find the stories in each other, since it was hard to reach out to other people. And I think that made me more resourceful. And I think that made my bonds with my friends and family closer. So I think that's what had the most profound impact on me. And also just understanding that things like getting equipment and shooting outside and all those things that maybe as an audience you don't think about is so much harder when COVID happens and when you're trying to learn as a student in a media production major. So I think that made me stronger and more motivated, that when things opened up, that I was ready to take that on. So that was this project for me.
Thanks. Couple more.
I have a question for Lei.
Toma?
Hi, Lei. Yeah, my name is Toma.
Hello.
Thank you very much for the film. Thank you also, Lily, for the film. Sorry, Emma is not with us this year again, but what a wonderful program. What a treat. Lei, I had a specific question about your use of sound, because you mentioned slow cinema, you mentioned taking your time, letting the moments unfold, letting the mood settle in this film. But at the same time, a lot of that is achieved, a lot of this atmosphere is achieved through your use of continuity editing and sound. So my question is, that sound is not always diegetic, right? It sounds like you have recorded a lot more sound than we get to see or to experience in live source, in spoken on screen. So many close-ups, so many beautiful moments that otherwise might pass as illustration actually come to life thanks to your masterful stitching of sound from elsewhere, sound sources. So I'm curious to hear maybe how you worked specifically with sound, and how you wove this narrative thread based on the sound. How that sort of worked with the images in the language that you found eventually.
Thomas? That's a great question. Are you studying film? Are you a film critic?
Let's not get into that now. But okay, I'm a filmmaker too.
Filmmaker, fellow filmmaker. I see. You see all the technical parts that we're trying to hide, so it looks very spontaneous.
No, there are a bunch of us also each in this room as well, so we have we have those reflexes formed, and Eric can probably also speak to that, and Luisa and a few others.
Yes, I think a lot of filmmakers would probably agree with me, but my sort of very firm belief in filmmaking is actually quite easy. It's just about stitching sound with image, just moving images. Sometimes not even have to move with sound, and that's it. And it's all about giving one thing while not giving the other. So having very strong images but sound relatively mellow, or having a lot of sound but image relatively sort of less to see. And it's a lot about this kind of rhythm, what to give and not to give too much. I guess it kind of shows in my film that Yulia and I, when we're discussing this, we're very concerned about not doing too much. So we try not to do too much, basically, and make everything seem quite seamless, but actually spending a lot of times on the details, as you have observed. Because we're essentially a two-people team, and when we're filming, we were already aware that we will have huge sound problem that you might not be able to see now because the film is finished. The main problem is that in some scenes you can tell like there are people in the background speaking, and that's okay. But it's all throughout the film. The market is quite noisy. Not just having people speaking in the background, but also have this like sound of people tearing the boxes and the plastic, which is, and it's not artistic. It sounds very bad. It sort of makes you do not want to listen to the film anymore. And it's all throughout the whole process of filming. And we were already discussing how we're going to deal with that in the sound process. So special thanks to Simon Peter, and also to Stefan, who's the musician, and Simon is the sound person for this project. We discussed quite a lot about how to deal with that. Of course, some of these sort of really annoying noises are being taken out, and some of them we have sort of play with them. And a main part of this is actually the music. So I think Heinbach, the musician, actually has done quite a lot to the film, because I think for a lot of smaller, really important moments in the film, it's very important to sort of not hear all these disturbances, and to be able to sort of completely involve and completely engage with that very small and at the same time very wonderful, great world of their imagination. So we took the background sound out and put music in very, very selective places. Because I don't like film that has a lot of music that controls how you feel, but I do believe that most movies need something that sort of can give a kind of environment, atmosphere, and moodiness to the film. So in some important places where we really want to highlight that intimate moment, we use Heinbach music, and he actually plays live, and that's like the best that we can ask from like a musician, is to ask him to sort of play the music as the girl moves or as something happens, and that matches perfectly with sort of the movement of the girl. And the sound is very simple. It just has 1-2 sound. And I was actually describing the scene where the girl is in the room where she's playing with the light. So I think that one was actually very, very well done by Heinbach, our musician. But that's actually, you're absolutely right. Sound is one of our key issue of the film. I think that sort of makes or breaks a film a lot of times, because I think a lot of times audience, as you can probably attest to that, can actually live with very bad images or very unstable images, or sort of moving images that is not perfect. But that sound is very bad, and or sound that gives too much. It has too much music, too much moods in it. Also, sort of, to me, breaks a film. So that's something definitely we have worked on. I hope to the audience that seems a little bit more seamless and less intentional than what I just described.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? Did you do a lot of re-recording with the kids? Did you have them record something separately? No.
No.
So it's
no.
all
We,
recorded on location during the shoot.
yes, and with no boom mic, just with a mount mic on the camera. So that's all. We're very limited. There's a question previously about quarantine and COVID. When we're doing the post production, we cannot go back to re-record the kids. But the voiceover was recorded afterwards. Yeah.
That just gave me real chills to hear that it was all recorded with a mic on the camera. Triggering some traumas, personal traumas. But I mean, the film really does have this kind of, maybe Bresson-like, French constructivist feeling, like Hasard Balthazar or something, but in documentary form and in a radically different kind of environment and time and space. So using these kind of techniques of narrative and fiction filmmaking and applying it to documentary, I think, can be extremely powerful. And it turns out that there's a lot of overlap between those formal methodologies that I think we often maybe forget that we can use these narrative techniques in documentary. There's really no reason why they're off limits to us. And yeah, I think that's really beautifully done.
Thank you.
One more. Adrian?
It's for Lay. Unfortunately, I got in a little late because of the last screen. Need to get some food, but you kind of touched on it, but I guess I wanted to hear like about kind of like your methodology and like sort of, I don't know, documentary best practices and working with children, and kind of like it has a special ambience to it, and I feel like so much of, like, especially commercial documentary people were looking for like sound bites, and these kind of like very key shots, and so I was wondering like the way maybe you structured the edit, or what things you like really, maybe if you have a scene and like how you built them, or if you had specific lines or stories or actions that you really liked, and then kind of how you sculpted it together.
Another fellow filmmaker question.
This is a room full of filmmakers, Lay.
Are you a commercial filmmaker, documentary filmmaker? Out of curiosity.
Yes, both. Both. Yeah. Well, I do like experimental stuff on the side, but I also have, I worked in starting in more, not too much commercial, literally in commercials, and then have done commercial and commercial documentary right now, and am working for a company that had a very big documentary in COVID, if not the biggest. But I guess I won't say what it is. But anyway, but it's interesting. I don't know. Is that like an NDA thing? I don't know. They have more money than I do, so I don't know. Just not on the. But let's just say involved.
NDA,
but
gotcha. NDA.
Yeah. Let's just say involves animal royalty. Okay, those are the two keywords. But obviously, like, just all the time witnessing like how much stuff how much money goes into these sound bites and these very specific ideas. So yeah, that's where that's coming from. And also I do experimental documentary. So yeah.
Great question. I guess we're now talking about sort of the livelihood of a filmmaker. How do you survive? Partially too. I think this is also sort of like a perfect question for Julian because he works in commercial, and that's sort of how he survived. He's a cinematographer doing mostly commercial film, and this is sort of the non-commercial project we work together. I'm an ethnographer, so I do research, and I also make documentary. So for me, I've worked in commercial before and I know exactly what you're talking about. And by working in commercial, I realized I cannot do that. It just does not fit my personality. I'm very, very slow. And I'm interested in sort of the everyday life of people and not sound bites. So at one point I realized, okay, commercial is not for me. So I just stay on the sort of the more academic route. But I think for me, that allows me to, when we have the material, you were asking how we construct a scene. We have a lot of materials. I don't remember how many hours, 50 hours, 60 hours of all the materials, of all the footage. And initially, we just start with sort of very basic film 101 process, which is to take out the scenes and sort of tease out the storyline and the characters. And at one point, we decided to cut one of the characters out completely because the film is too full with already 3 characters. Apart from that, it's just very slow process of getting familiar with the material, taking out the scene. The scene was initially way longer. It's already very long right now, but it was sort of like 20 minutes per scene. And then we submitted that sort of rough cut to Vision Studio in Switzerland. And that's sort of the first rough cut. And then we sort of make the scene smaller. But essentially for me, I think Tama also mentioned there's a lot of stitching together and also Eric as well. It's definitely correct because we only had one camera and we're trying to film more angles and sort of have you to see the environment a little bit more as opposed to from just one angle and one location. So essentially, we have to stitch a lot of these different angles together to make one scene and to make it smooth, to look like as if different cameras are filming, and to also to allow you to sort of be in that location. And then once the scenes are set, then for me, it's about ordering, what scenes to come first, which scenes should come later. So for me, for instance, the scene where the girl is playing with the light, that's sort of like a highlight for me. That I decided to put more towards the end of the film, and then we also discuss sequences, what scene should we follow with which scene, and also to mix the objects. The more the scenes where you cannot see the individuals, with scenes where it's very heavy with the sisters and them interacting, and a lot of drama. So essentially, just a very simple process of looking at the footage over and over again, decide on the scenes, and then deciding on the order. I think that's quite a typical process of documentary filmmaking, non-commercial, as opposed to sort of looking for sound bites.
Yeah, go for it, Louisa.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked about most of the things, but not about the elephant in the room. So today, I think, and yesterday, we talked about how, of course, the personal is political. You make personal films that hit on the political topics that actually influence us personally. So if you can address a little bit this, because you're very direct in your film, talking about, the constraints and everything that is going on, growing up in China and just living there. So, or how it is to leave that place and find yourself in another place, in another language, with another name or so. So if you can address this, these things. Thank you.
That's a beautiful question. So I've lived in the United States for 10 years and almost 10 years in Germany and then also in Japan. I was talking with my old mentor the other day. I'm constantly living in homelessness, a feeling of homelessness, not actually being homeless, but I feel like I don't really have a home or roots in a sense. I don't really identify with my culture, no other language. So when I was looking at the girls, I feel like I had a feeling that they were actually growing up with more constraint than I had. And now, having moved back to China during COVID to be closer to my family, I realized that feeling was absolutely right. Now I'm teaching a lot of female students, and the kind of constraint and the kind of sort of peer pressure and how other people expect them to look and to work and the social roles they should take. I think that's way more constraining and harsh than when I was growing up. I think there was a lot of freedom, partially due to my parents and partially due to the fact that I was growing up in a city that was literally also growing. You know, Shenzhen in the 90s, where we were witnessing streets and roads being built. There were no rules. There were no so much, laws even. But nowadays, everything is very sort of set. And I have a lot of students, especially female students, coming over to me complaining about the stress they're experiencing, the anxiety. I feel very sad, but I think there's very little I can do. The only thing I feel like I can do is by documenting it or through my research to talk about, for instance, some of our research. I have a research group mostly with girls, and we're studying online communities. And there are, for instance, a lot of growing online communities that are women-only groups, social media, on social media platform in China. So there are definitely ways in which girls, women are fighting against all these social constraints and pressure, but their voices are not very loud. You can hardly hear them, and they have to work against a lot of restrictions. I guess I realized at one point that there's nothing I can do about it. It's a way bigger problem than myself. The only thing I can do is to document it, to write papers about it, to make films about it, so that hopefully their voices can be heard, even though it's not very mainstream. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Louisa. Lily, Lei, thank you so much for sharing your work with us, for spending some time with us this evening. This was a lovely conversation, and we hope that you'll be back soon. One more round of applause, please. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, Lei.